Okay, it seems we are live. Yes, we are. 0 attendees at the moment, so we can wait a bit until people join. Okay, people are joining. So let's start with, I will introduce myself, and then I will let Joe do introduction for himself and to give you a brief description of what he will be talking about today. My name is Alexander Savkovic, and I am a WordPress community manager here in Cloudways. I will be hosting today Joe Williams. He will do one interesting workshop about Google Page Speed experience, especially the changes that are coming in May and what you need to do to prepare for those changes, to prepare well for those changes, for both from page speed and SEO perspective. So I will now let Joe introduce himself. You can ask anything you like in comments, and even during the webinar, I will interrupt Joe and I will ask a question if it's something important to reply right away while he's on topic. And that would be it from me. I will now leave Joe with you, and I will just take care that each of your questions is asked. Joe, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexander. So, before I share my slides, just a little bit about myself. My name is Joe Williams. I've been an SEO for around 15 years. And today we're going to talk about Google's page experience update. So what you need to do to prepare, and I'm going to share some really, really practical tips that will show you how my website scores 99% for Google Page Speed Insights, which really helps with this Google Page Experience update. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully now you can see my slides and you should be able to see myself as well. So the company that I work for, or my company, is called tribeseo.com, and we offer online SEO training. So it's an online SEO course. And in preparation for this update, this Google Page Experience update, what I've done is I've kind of optimized our website. So if you go into Google Page Speed Insights, our mobile score is 99%. And really, half of this new update is about how well you're doing in the Google Page Speed Insights scores, at least 3 of the metrics. And we're going to cover all that today. And if you stick around to the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we went from 37% to 97%. And there was one key optimization technique that we did there that got us that massive leap. So I'll let you know how we did that. And I'll also let you know how we then moved from 97 to 99%. And this is a mobile score. And it's really hard to move when you start to score really highly. And one little tip, Cloudways were a big hand in helping with that. So just to recap, I'll share how we went from 37 to 97% and then from 97 to 99%. Now, this is for our own website, and what you can see is it's actually very feature rich, or it's a lot of rich media. There's probably a couple of dozen images, there's 9 videos, there's a lot of text, so it's not just a simple site that we've managed to optimize and score highly. So just a little bit about myself. So my name's Joe Williams, or Joe the SEO. I work for a company called Tribe SEO. And I'm on a mission to make SEO easier, fun, and profitable for small businesses. Okay, so what is page experience? Well, according to Google, well, Google announced that there was going to be an update called Page Experience in May the 28th last year. And they also said that there was going to be a search ranking change. So Google has around 200 ranking factors, probably a bit more than 200 now. And one of these ranking factors is called Page Experience, or will be called Page Experience. It's going to be released in May this year, in 2021. And that's what this webinar is all about. It's all about how you can prepare to make your websites faster and to score higher for this Page Experience ranking signal. So if we have a look at what this Page Experience signal is, well, Google says that it measures aspects of how users perceive the experience of interacting with a web page, and optimizing for these factors makes the web more delightful for users across all browsers and surfaces, and helps sites evolve towards users' expectations on mobile. And the last bit is really important. So users' expectations on mobile. I think in around 2015, mobile usage overtook desktop on both the web and on Google. So more people were using mobile devices. And Google has kind of become a little bit obsessed with having a great user experience on mobile. We saw it with the mobile-friendly updates about 5 years ago. So if your web pages were mobile-friendly, they would get a ranking boost. A few years ago, Google started rolling out mobile-first indexing. So when Google finds pages on the internet, it wants to store them in its database, which it calls its index. And right now, it does it mobile first. So it takes a snapshot of how your web pages are looking from a mobile device, and it stores that data in its index. And this Page Experience update has a lot to do with mobile, as we'll see in a moment. So broadly speaking, we can break this update into two areas. We've got the new signals. So these are the core web vitals, which are largely to do with how fast your web pages load. And that's kind of like the newer area to marketers and web developers. And then we've got these original signals. So this is basically, these are signals that we knew about before the announcement of this update. And we need to make sure we pass these tests as well. So in order for you to get the benefit of this Page Experience signal, you need to pass all, I think it's 7 tests, the 7 things you need to do to get right. And we're going to cover all of them today. So just to give you an idea of the format of this session, the first half is really about the what. So what are the original signals? What are the new signals? And then the second part is really, really practical, where I show you really the how. So how do you optimize for this update? How have we optimized our web page to score highly, for the core web vitals, which are the new signals? Okay, so let's start with the original signals, and the first one is mobile friendly. Now, if I go onto Google and I type in Google mobile friendly test, then you'll get taken to a web page where you can enter in a URL. So in this case, I've put our homepage, tribeseo.com, and Google will tell you whether the page is mobile friendly or not. So in this case, it's mobile friendly. So for this particular web page, we've passed that first test. So 1 of 7, we've got a tick for that. But this tool only checks one page at a time. If you want to check your whole website, then you can use Google Search Console's mobile usability report. Now, if you haven't used Google Search Console, it's a great tool. It's free. You do have to sort of prove to Google that you have access to your website, but you get a lot of data and insights from this tool. And one of them will tell you for your whole website, how many pages are valid from a mobile usability perspective, and whether you've got any errors. So if you do have some errors, it might be things like the text is too small to be seen from a mobile device, or that the clickable elements are too close together. Google will tell you what pages are affected, and then you can kind of work out what improvements you need to do to improve things. Okay, so let's look at the second signal that we need to get right. This one's straightforward, and usually there isn't much you need to do. So if I just type into Google Securities Issues Report, Google says that if a Google evaluation determines that your site was hacked or that it exhibits behavior that could potentially harm a visitor or their computer, the Security Issues Report will show Google's findings. And if I click this button, it just takes me into Google Search Console. And in this case, it's telling me there's no issues detected, which of course is what we want to see. So I confidently know that I've passed the second tick. So I've got 2 out of the 7 ticks so far. Now, the third one's pretty straightforward as well. It's HTTPS. So this is Cloudway's lovely looking homepage. And we can see there's a green padlock there next to the address bar. So that means that the page is secure, which is what we need to help us pass this page experience signal. But if it wasn't secure, you would see this not secure label. That might put off users to your site, and it would mean that you wouldn't pass this page experience signal. So that's something that you would need to get right. Back in the day, we only made secure pages like shopping carts and contact us pages, whereas now the best practice is to secure all pages on your website. Okay, so the last one is, I guess, the funniest sounding one, but it's no intrusive interstitials. So this one really is about helping users easily access content on your mobile. And specifically, it's around not having pop-ups on mobile, on your site, on a mobile device that basically cover the main content. So if you've come on a mobile device and you want to see some content and you can't see it because of annoying pop-ups, then this is what Google is talking about when it says you shouldn't have any intrusive interstitials. Now, there are some examples of when interstitials are okay. So to accept cookie usage on a website, that's considered okay. For age verification, maybe you're selling alcohol or something like that, that's considered okay. And the last one is when the pop-up is really small. And in this case, the pop-up's right at the top of the page. It's maybe taking up a fifth or a quarter of the page. So we've covered the original signals. Let's now look at the new signals. So collectively, these are known as Core Web Vitals, and they're largely to do with page speed and performance. So the first one is called Largest Contentful Paint, and this is to do with the loading of a web page. Now, I will be talking about web.dev, which is a website run by Google, quite a bit. I'll be referencing it quite a bit in this webinar, so I definitely recommend checking it out. But Google says that the largest contentful paint is an important user-centric metric for measuring perceived load speed because it marks the point in the page load timeline when the page's main content has likely loaded. A fast LCP helps reassure the user that the page is useful. Okay, that makes sense. And Google also says that older metrics like load or DOM content loaded are not good because they don't necessarily correspond to what the user sees on their screen. So if you use some tools like Pingdom, really, really good tool. I use it a lot myself for lots of different reasons. But one thing that they promote the most is the page load time. And it might be that you've got a fairly fast page load time, but there's not very much being shown right at the beginning, which wouldn't be a good user experience. So what Largest Contentful Paint attempts to do is to kind of give you an idea of when that first impression was met and that it was actually a good first impression and the user saw something quite quickly. So let's have a look at an example. Again, this is using Google's examples. So this is a CNN website, and there are 5 sequences. So in the first sequence, what we can see is the first contentful paint. Now, bearing in mind we want to optimize for the largest contentful paint, but the first contentful paint is the very first thing that is shown to the user, or it's the largest first thing that is shown to the user. So the largest contentful paint in the first instance is that text, which says visual stories. Now, in the second sequence, the largest contentful paint changes from visual stories to that main headline, who has qualified for the September debate so far. And the largest contentful paints maintains in the third sequence and the fourth sequence, but then it changes in the fifth sequence to that big image. And the reason it changes is because it's the largest element on the page, and nothing after that is bigger than that image. So that's what the largest contentful paint is. And the time is from when the first contentful paint showed to when the ending last contentful paint is shown. That's your largest contentful paint score. Now, in this Google example, we can see that the first contentful paint is for the keyword Larry Page, which is one of Google's co-founders. And in the second sequence, the largest contentful paint changes from Larry Page to this text block about Larry Page. And this actually ends as the largest contentful paint because it's the largest element that's shown to the user. And we can actually see in the second sequence, there are some images loading, but those are individual images and they're smaller than the previous text block. And in fact, in the fifth sequence, we get this final image loading, but because it's smaller than that text block, it's not the largest contentful paint. So in these two examples, Google will score, will be faster for largest contentful paint because the time will be smaller. Okay, so speaking of times, what do we want to aim for? Well, in order to pass this test, you need to get a good score. And when I say this test, I mean the Google Page Experience signal. So you need to get 2.5 seconds or less from a mobile device. If you get between 2.5 and 4 seconds, you're kind of close, but you need to improve. And if it's over 4 seconds, then it's a poor score. Okay, so the next one is first input delay, FID. And Google says first input delay is an important user-centric metric for measuring load responsiveness because it quantifies the experience users feel when trying to interact with unresponsive pages. A low FID helps ensure that the page is usable. So I don't know if you've ever visited a web page and you were clicking on a link or a button and nothing was happening. And that might be because their first input delay was poor. They were getting a poor score for this metric. And Google's kind of saying, look, the largest contentful paint is when you see something that you think will be useful. And the first input delay is when that page actually becomes useful, when you can click on it or do something. And just to kind of give you a breakdown of how this works, here's a diagram that Google has created. And essentially, when a web page loads on your browser, there are a series of network requests. And a lot of these are for files or scripts that get processed on the browser. So things like CSS files, things like JavaScript files. And then the main thread on the browser will process these requests. And when you have JavaScript files, because there's a lot of calculation, some of these requests take a long time to process. So some of these larger beige blocks are likely to be JavaScript that's being processed, and this comes at a cost. Because if the user attempts to click on a link, so the browser receives the first user input, but if the browser is processing one of the network requests, like a long JavaScript file, then the browser won't be able to do anything until it's finished processing that JavaScript request. And the first input delay is the first time this happens and the time it takes between when the user clicked on something or tried to interact on something and when that action was actually responded to. So that's first input delay. It's to do with the user interacting with a web page. And that's something that we need to optimize for as well. So again, in order to pass the test, you need to get a score of 100 milliseconds or less from a mobile device. Between 100 and 300 needs improvement, and over 300 is considered poor. Okay, so the last thing that we need to look at is cumulative layout shift. So Google says that cumulative layout shift, CLS, is an important user-centric metric for measuring visual stability because it helps quantify how often users experience unexpected layout shifts. A low CLS helps ensure that the page is delightful. And Google also says, have you ever been reading an article online when something suddenly changes on the page? Without warning, the text moves and you've lost your place. Or even worse, you're about to tap a link or a button, but the instance before your finger lands, boom, the link moves and you end up clicking something else. Now, I know that's happened to me and it can be quite frustrating. So let's just have a look at an example. Now, let's imagine that you are on an animal website and you want to research dogs. Now, I have a fox-legged Labrador called Conker. So let's pretend I'm clicking on or I'm trying to click on the dog link, but actually the layout changes and I end up clicking on the crocodile page and snap, I'm on the wrong page. It's not a good experience. Even worse, sometimes, you could be trying to click on a link and the ads drop down and you end up clicking on an ad instead and taken away to a website you never wanted to visit. So you can kind of see why cumulative layout shift is important. Okay, so what are we aiming for? Well, we want to get a score of 0.1 or less to pass the test. Between 0.1 and 0.25 isn't too far away, but needs improvement. And over 0.25 is considered poor. Okay, so before we talk about how you optimize for Core Web Vitals, which I'm really looking forward to, how to measure Core Web Vitals. Well, Google provides the resource, so tools to measure Core Web Vitals. And again, this is on the web.dev website. And there's about half a dozen tools. Most of these tools are aimed at web developers, but the two that are more aimed at marketers are Search Console and PageSpeed Insights. Now, Search Console is probably more thorough in that it will record, your whole site for a longer period. But I also find that it's sometimes incomplete. If your website isn't known that well by Google, you won't get much of a full picture of how you're doing. Whereas PageSpeed Insights, you can only check one page at a time, but it kind of, it's a good place to start, I would say. I would say start with PageSpeed Insights and then maybe have a look at Google Search Console as well. So if you just Google PageSpeed Insights, this will take you to Google's tool. And I've actually just popped in the URL that we were just looking at. So the web.dev URL, which is created by Google, and it's for their Vitals tool. And what we can see is that their performance score, this is Google's score, was 74%, which you'd think they'd probably do better than at their own test. And it says, over the previous 28 days collection period, the aggregated experience of all pages served from this origin did not pass the Core Web Vitals assessment. So this means that you wouldn't pass the Google Page Experience signal either. Now, to be fair to Google, I took this screenshot a few weeks ago, and right now, or when I tested it not that long ago, the performance score was higher, and they did pass the Core Web Vitals assessment. Now, below that, you've got two sets of data. The first is field data, which not everyone will get for their website. If your website isn't that known by Google, and Google doesn't have much sample data for users on your website, then it won't come up with any information here. And that's okay, but what you'll need to do is look at the lab data. And the lab data is basically a live test from when you ran the URL to straight after. So the lab data is really good when you want to check to see if any changes to your website have actually improved your performance scores. So let's look at the 3 Core Web Vital metrics. The first is largest contentful paint. And this gets a orange square. So that means it's in the needs improvement area. And that's because it gets a score of 2.6 seconds. So it's just 0.1 second out from being where it needs to be to get that green circle. And that's what we're aiming for. We need green circles for these 3 core web vitals. The second is first input delay, which does get a green circle because it's within the threshold. In this case, it's at 18 milliseconds. But the cumulative layout shift is 0.2 seconds, which gets a red square. So we can see the areas of where Google needs to improve. Okay, now when we look at the lab data, Google's largest contentful paint is 4.9 seconds. So it gets a red triangle. That means it's poor. So when I did this live test, it was worse than it was in the previous 28 days. Now, the first input delay isn't available in the lab data because it requires on a real person clicking on the page. So Google has created basically a similar metric, which you can use as a substitute. It's called total blocking time. And in this case, the web page did get a green circle, and that's because it's within the threshold. The cumulative layout shift, again, it gets a green circle because it's in the threshold. Now, if you want to know where you're struggling or where you can improve, then what you need to do is just scroll down and have a look in the opportunity section and the diagnostic section. This is where Google will highlight what areas you can improve on your website. So you'll want to pay a lot of attention to this. Now, one thing that you'll need to know is how do you optimize, or what is the largest contentful paint? Well, if you have a look down, Google tells you what your largest contentful paint element is. Now, it's normally the main image that you see on a web page, the biggest image that you see without scrolling. But in this case, that's not the case. It's actually the main heading, which is the H1 of the page. Okay, so now we're getting to what I would say is the exciting part. So how do you optimize core web vitals? Now, if you've kind of come from a bit of a computing background, I'll get a little bit geeky here, but it's really not that complicated. But what we call the device that you use as a computer, so it could be your mobile device, it could be your laptop or desktop, we call that the client. And we sometimes think of that as more of the front end. And there are client-side scripts that run on that device. And the client is served by, drumroll please, well, it's served by the web server. And that's really where your website is hosted. So, your website might be hosted with Cloudways, for example. But that web server runs client-side scripts. So in the case of WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, the scripting language is PHP. Now, for Microsoft, it might be ASP, for example. And there are scripts that are run at the client side as well. So what I mean by run is PHP is processed on the web server. And when it's processing calculations that's in the programming language, that can slow your web page down. So you need to be mindful of what scripts you're running within your PHP or whatever programming language your web server uses. But also, the client side. So usually this is less to do with the CSS, but more to do with the JavaScript that you're running on your client device. And, when I was getting into this topic, I really underestimated how important optimizing your scripts are for scoring well in Google PageSpeed Insights and for scoring well in this page experience update. So I'm going to look at these 3 areas of what you need to optimize. The first is going to be largest contentful paint. Then we'll look at the client side, and then we'll look at the server side. So if you want to optimize for largest contentful paint, you need to optimize the largest contentful paint element. You need to optimize client side, so how you're handling JavaScript. You need to optimize server side, so what web host you're using, the hardware that you're using, the scripts that are being run on the web host. For first input delay, Now, really, the largest contentful paint element doesn't really have that much to do with first input delay, maybe a very small amount. But what you're mainly optimizing for is the client side. So what's happening on the browser, and specifically JavaScript, or largely JavaScript. But the server-side aspect will have an impact as well. If you've got a fast web host and you're not being slowed down by server-side scripts, that will help. And then when we think about cumulative layout shift, then that's mainly to do with client side. So the reason you have a layout shift is because your CSS and HTML isn't working together optimally. So that happens client side. Okay, so for largest contentful paint element, often it's the image. So what can we do to optimize the image? Well, this is the example that Google used. This is the image that Google used in its example, but I think the image must have got taken down because I couldn't find the web page online now. So what I've done is I found a similar image covering a similar topic, and we'll look at things you can do to improve your largest contentful paint score. So the first one is to reduce the file size. So in this case, the file size was 307 KB, which is pretty large, and just using an online tool. So I think it was tinyjpeg.com. I managed to reduce the image from 307 KB to 58.4 KB, and there wasn't really much noticeable, lacking quality, not to my human eye. So that's one thing you can do, is you can reduce the file size if the largest contentful paint is an image. You can also use an optimal file format. So, JPEGs and PNGs have been the standard web fonts for years and years. But Google is kind of introducing this next, or not just Google, but Google is promoting next-gen formats. And Google says image formats like JPEG 2000, JPEG XR, and WebP often provide better compression than PNG or JPEG, which means faster downloads and less data consumption. So this isn't something that I've experimented that much with our site, but I am planning to. So definitely think it's something to look at. Now, a lot of photo editing tools like Photoshop don't support things like WebP out of the box. I think you can get an extension for Photoshop. So it's still relatively new in terms of, formats that people are using. Now, the next thing you can do is preload. You can preload resources. So this could be like a web font. If you're using a custom web font, you could preload it, which basically means you reference it higher up in the code than it would be reached if the page was being read by a browser. So in the case of an image, you'll basically, if your image is kind of like 25% of the way down your page, well, you could preload it and reference it right at the start. So you just need to add in some code, which is the link rel preload. And I'll come back to how that made a significant improvement for our largest contentful paint element a little bit later. Okay, so the next one is client side. So I mentioned this is, if we think about a mobile device, this is what's being run through the browser from the actual device that's viewing the web page. And what tends to slow it down most is JavaScript, but CSS can play a role as well. So the first thing that I would encourage you to do is to see whether you can eliminate unnecessary scripts. So if you use a tool like Pingdom or GTmetrix, what it will do is it will show you all the files that are requested by the page, from a page when the URL is loaded. And what you'll sometimes find is some of these files are just not necessary. So our previous version of our homepage, I remember when I went through this exercise that there was a file request for a share this on social media widget, which we only used on our blog posts. But because of some untidy coding, it was being referenced on our homepage without actually being seen. So I just needed to tweak the code, and that helped, with this kind of metric. So review what file requests you have and try and eliminate any unnecessary ones. Minify. So if you have JavaScript or CSS that's been downloaded to your client device, then you can use minification, which basically strips out spaces and line breaks, makes it quite hard for someone like me or you to read, but browsers find it easy to read, and it's a smaller file size, so it will get downloaded quicker. Compression. Arguably, this happens server-side, so the compression that I'm talking about, server-side compression, but I'm putting it here as a client-side optimization technique because it can have a big impact client-side. So you want to see if you can compress your JavaScript and CSS and even images as well, server-side. So that's something that you'll want to check. Things that you can use is gzip compression. On WordPress, you can enable it through the .htaccess file. Now, my favorite on this list is defer. So when a web page loads, essentially what happens, if we look at our homepage here, every file that's requested basically is battling it out, is competition with each other. They all want to be loaded first. And, without doing any real optimization, there's a battle, what's going to get the resources first. So in this example, we can see there's a live widget in the bottom right-hand corner. This uses JavaScript and it's quite intensive. And what we found was that it slowed every page speed metric down just from this live widget. So I was kind of like, I really want to use this live widget because it actually does help us get sales, but I don't want it to slow down our website. So what we did is we deferred the live chat widget. So we basically told the browser to ignore it for a few seconds. Now you can defer lots of things. We've got several bits of JavaScript running on our site. And for the non-essential JavaScript, like this pop-up email widget, we deferred that as well. So it wasn't competing with the largest contentful paint element. It was just waiting in the queue until it was its turn. So you'll want to research whether you can defer, especially things like JavaScript files. Okay, so that's client-side optimization. Let's have a look at server-side optimization. Now, your web host makes a big difference. So this webinar is run by Cloudways. Now, they are a web host. They offer hardware. So where your computer lives, it needs hard drive, it needs RAM, it needs a processor. And you want a web host that's fast. And Cloudways is very fast. In fact, we'll see in a moment that just how fast it was and why we moved. I only moved a week or two. So Cloudways approached me to do this webinar. I wasn't even a customer, but I thought, hey, let's give it a trial. So I gave it a trial and the results were really impressive. So I'll talk more about the Cloudways results in a moment. But the other thing that you can do is you can apply caching. So Cloudways has a caching plugin called Breeze, I believe. There are other caching plugins that exist for, on WordPress and lots of other content management systems. So you'll want to make sure that you are caching your web pages. And most web pages work dynamically, which means they kind of query the database and process calculations, and caching basically kind of makes the pages more static so they can load quicker. Most modern web hosts are on HTTP 2, so the second protocol, as opposed to HTTP 1. And if you type into Google HTTP 2 checker, you can enter in your website and it will tell you if it's on HTTP 2, and you really do want it to be. And the last one is scripts. And I was so surprised at how much of an impact scripts, server-side scripts, had on our page speed score. So in the case of WordPress, the programming language is PHP and the SQL is MySQL. So that's what's querying the database when we're bringing data back to the web pages, to the web page. And this has a big impact because before anything can happen in terms of the download process, these calculations have to be made on the server. So the longer these calculations take, the slower your performance score will be. Now, these examples I'm going to give you apply to WordPress, but the principles apply to almost all content management systems, at least if you have a dynamic content management system, which most are. So Drupal, Joomla, they're all dynamic content management systems. So with WordPress, what happens is it will be querying your database. It will be running PHP scripts. So these are things that will slow down the time from when the web server serves the content to the user. Most WordPress sites have a theme. Hello theme is one of the popular themes, and it's actually created by Elementor, which is a page builder. And both the theme and the page builder will be querying the database, and they'll be running PHP scripts. All of these things can slow your website down. Now, just for the record, Elementor and the Hello theme are considered relatively quick themes and page builders. So, if you've got them, that's you've chosen fairly wisely. But I will talk about some other options. Now, most websites on WordPress have lots of plugins. In fact, we have 20 plugins on our site, but I was very careful in the ones we chose, because some plugins are less efficient in terms of how they run their code. And when they're less efficient, it takes more time to process. Now, we didn't use a page builder and we didn't use a theme on WordPress. We actually used a hybrid. I think it's the only one of the kind that I know of. So rather than a theme or a page builder, we used Oxygen Builder, which is a theme builder. And its main selling point is that the code is really, really lean. It's really efficient. There's very little bloat in there. So it is quicker than combining a page builder and a theme together. Now, it's not marketed at being quite as easy to use as something like Elementor. So there's a trade-off between ease of use and speed. But myself, it was the first time I actually ever built a website from scratch. In December, when we built our own site, I built it all myself in Oxygen. And I would probably say, if you've got basic CSS knowledge, so you can edit some CSS, you don't know how to write it, but mine was very basic. I know what margins are and padding is. That sort of helped. I think if I didn't know that, I might struggle to get to grips with Oxygen. Okay, so we can see there that there are a lot of scripts that are run in the background on your web server. And if you choose the wrong, theme, page builder, or plugins, these are all things that can slow your website down. There is a trade-off between ease and use, and speed. So, you'll want to get a balance of what's right for you. Now, we use WP Fluent Forms instead of Gravity Forms. I do like Gravity Forms, and I did use it for about 10 years, but I chose Fluent Forms because it was just really lean code. And I was kind of getting a bit obsessed with page speed, probably a little bit too obsessed. So how do you know if you've optimized well for the server-side side of things? Well, one way you can do is by checking out what your time to first byte is. This is also known as your server response time. And it's the time that it takes for the first byte of information to go from your web server to the client. So it depends on your hosting, depends if you're on HTTP2, and it depends on the scripts that have been run on your server. Now, you can get this information from the Google PageSpeed Insights tool, but it's probably easier to get from bytecheck.com. So when I run our website through bytecheck.com, what I found, and this was really interesting, was our time to first byte with the exact same website as our previous web host was 96 milliseconds. And that gave us 5 stars on this tool. When we were with Kinsta, which is a premium WordPress hosting tool known for speed, we got 194 milliseconds. So it's about it was twice as fast in terms of time to first byte. And that's what I actually did 2 weeks ago. I moved from Kinsta to Cloudways, because I was doing this webinar, I just thought, hey, this is a challenge. Why don't I see if I can improve my page speed scores? So I gave it a go. Cloudways actually has a free trial. So I'm challenging you to give it a go. Why don't you see if you can improve your page speed times? I think there's a free trial. I think it's like maybe 3 days trial, but I believe what Cloudways is going to do, either in the comments below watching this video, or you'll get an email, you'll get a promo code with a discount. And I think that just means you can take a bit longer with the migration if you need to. But I actually got the migration done for me by Cloudways. I think that was part of the deal. And I was surprised without doing, basically the exact same site on Kinsta, on Cloudways. I saw a lot of improvements in terms of speed. Okay, so how did Tribe SEO score 99% in Google Page Speed Insights from a mobile device? Well, the first thing that we did to get us from 37% to 97%, well, the main thing that actually improved the score was deferring JavaScript. And that was because our homepage was quite heavy in using JavaScript. We had a relatively fast server-side scripts, but our client-side scripts were really holding us back. Now, the tool that we use is WP Rocket, but I'm planning to test out Cloudways tool that does the same job, and that's called Breeze. So it'd be really interesting to see how I can do with that. And I gather it can do much the same thing. In terms of how we got from 97% to 96%, well, what we did is we just upgraded our server. We went from Kinsta to Cloudways, and our largest contentful paint went from 2.4 seconds to 2.1 seconds. So it really had a benefit. When we were at the 2.4 seconds with Kinsta, it fluctuated from 2.4 to 2.6. So sometimes it was over the threshold of 2.5, and we actually failed the largest contentful paint test. One thing to add is I only did this morning, but I realized that when I had added the preload for our first contentful paint, I had done it incorrectly, and I'd missed out the www part of our subdomain. So when I corrected that, our largest contentful paint went from 2.1 seconds to 1.9. So that's something else to throw into the mix. It wasn't enough to get to 100, but I'm getting pretty close. So I think, that is possible. We'll see what happens. Okay, so just to recap on Tribe SEO's technology stack, we use WordPress, Oxygen Builder as our theme and page builder, has really lean code. We've got Cloudways as our web host, and we chose their Vultr server, really, really fast. We're using WP Rocket as our kind of caching plugin, and it helps with deferring JavaScript. But we haven't had a chance to try Cloudways Breeze plugin. So I'd be really interested to see, maybe it works even better because it's integrating with its own hardware and software. That would be cool. We use Cloudflare as our CDN. Now, I didn't really notice that much difference by adding Cloudflare in terms of page speed, but it does add security features. So we're using Cloudflare. So just to kind of recap, some of the things that you need, just bear with me a sec. You need to pass 7 things in order to get this page experience signal. So the original signals: mobile friendly, safe browsing, HTTPS, no intrusive interstitials. New signals: largest contentful paint, 2.5 seconds or less, first input delay, 100 milliseconds or less, and cumulative layout shift, 0.1 seconds or less. Now, if you want to research this more, I probably spent half a day or a day just reading through Google's Web Vitals resources. It talks about what the metrics are. It talks about how you can measure the Web Vitals. And the last bit is what I found really useful, is how to improve the Web Vitals. So there's a lot of in-depth information, definitely not bedtime reading information, but I found it really, really useful. Okay, so the final notes. Google Page Experience Update, or the Signal, is being launched in May, so in a month or two's time. It requires that you pass all the signals to get the ranking boost. Benefits of fast loading web pages include a ranking boost. Now, Google has said this will be small at first, so there's no need to panic if you're not doing that well initially, but it may get bigger over time. It'll offer better user experience, better conversions from visitors to customers. You want to optimize the original signals, so mobile friendly, safe browsing, HTTPS, no intrusive interstitials. You want to optimize the new signals, so Core Web Vitals, LCP, FID, and CLS. And I want you to pay particular attention to the client and server side, and to really have a look at what scripts you're using and how you can optimize them. And I think, this goes without saying, but you need a reliable and quick web host. So a little hint there, we've moved to Cloudways. We are a customer. We're not getting it for free. We're paying for it like everyone else. And I'm really, really happy with the experience. The support's been great. The speed's been amazing. And I actually found the interface really easy to use. Okay, guys, I just want to say a big thank you to Cloudways for giving me this opportunity to talk to you guys. It's been really, really awesome. So I'm going to hand it back over to Alexander. And if we have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Hi, I'm back.
Hi, Alexander.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
It was a really nice webinar.
Oh, thank you.
And you gave us a lot of nice insights and ideas what to do with our websites, especially for our clients and users, and maybe even the people like you who were building their websites from scratch without actually knowing coding and what to do and how to use everything, and then you pick some page builders, which is, let's say, the most common way how people are building websites these days. Let's see what Maya has to ask. She has a few questions. What are the best recommendations for icons? Background for icons are different for iPhone and Android phones. And she has experience with slow loading fonts. So what are recommendations for website fonts? I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, so with the website fonts, if you're using custom ones, you can preload the fonts. So some caching tools let you do that. Or you can just go into the code yourself and preload the fonts. In terms of the icons, I'm not a web developer, so I won't pretend to be, an expert in that area, particularly when it comes to like iPhone and Android devices. But to be honest, I just use SVG images. So they really small file size, and the quality is really good when they get bigger. And I just let Oxygen Builder take care of the rest for me. I don't quite know how they differ, from one device to another.
There's one more thing I would like to add here, because you mentioned WebP format. It's actually the best one, but technology is, let's say, in the early stages. So if you're using WebP, you will need some plugins for fallback, because older Safari doesn't support WebP. So there are plugins for WordPress that will actually fall back to JPEG or PNG. So you can do that. Also, the good practice is also to cache Google Analytics. There is a plugin called Chaos. He's actually storing entire script on your server and delivering Google Analytics Google Analytics script from your server, and it's checking every week if that script may be changed. It doesn't change that often, so Chaos is doing a great job, and OMGF is actually doing the same with Google Fonts. So it doesn't load Google Fonts every time, but it actually stores Google Fonts directly on your server and delivers them directly from your server, which is awesome. What is the next question? Does it matter which server in Cloudways you choose? Yeah, well, yes, it does matter, because first of all, you need to pick some server which is closest, data center which is closest to the biggest number of visitors, of course. And there are slight differences, but let's say that those three, like Linode, DigitalOcean, and Walter, are pretty much similar with performance. It depends on your, let's say, preferences. Which would you prefer from?
We used Vultr for ours and from London, but yeah, it's I'm sure it does make a difference. As Alexander said, you want to go close in terms of the location. So we went London because we're based in the UK. Would have maybe liked to have gone for Google, but it was quite a bit more expensive. So we went for Vultr.
I mean, AWS or cheaper one? Yeah, well, AWS will probably give better results. And you should always Manon ask us this. So Manon, of course, it will give better results, but it is more expensive, and it does make sense that you will have better results with more expensive server. Now, I wanted also to share one more thing with all the visitors now, because you all know that we have like 3 days free trial, which is sometimes just not enough to test and to do all of this stuff like optimization to see how Cloudways is good. So I will be sharing at the end of our webinar, I will share a coupon code with $20 on it. So you can use at least for a month. You can test some of the servers and see what kind of results you will be getting. So you will not be in rush to finish everything in 3 days. A lot of websites recommend DigitalOcean or Linode servers, and I'm personally using Linode. Well, you can share your experience, Joe, with Walter, actually.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, one of the things we got really good results, but one of the things that's really easy to do when you're doing your tests with Cloudways is you can actually set up a second server and you can clone your website to this new server. And, you're only being charged on an hourly basis. So even if you go for this is how I understand it, even if you go for a really top spec, with loads of RAM and whatever, you won't really be charged very much. If anything, I think it would all be within this $20, assuming you don't, you switch it off quite soon. So you can do your own tests. And, we got great results from, a really well-priced Vultr server.
Let's see if we have more questions. No, this is actually a bit of communication between our visitors, which is awesome because they're also fixing issues while we're speaking. What is the best source to learn CSS? Okay, we can answer this in our group in our page. That is not the topic. Do we have some more questions for Joe, maybe regarding also SEO and these Google changes upcoming in May? What service Joe Williams guest provide? Yes. How to serve WebP images without a WordPress plugin, or serve JPEG if the client doesn't support WebP? Yeah, that is what I said. That there is a plugin. You need to use the plugin for default.
One plugin is called Short. I think it's Short Pixel. So I literally just had a look at it last night, and that does that exact same thing. So it will lead with WebP, and then it will do the substitutions where needed. I didn't find it that easy to use, so I still haven't got it working properly. But it exists, and I'm sure you can get there, and there are tools there that will help.
Let's see. Another one, Maja Milosevic. Recommendations for user experience for Google May update. Do you have some of those recommendations to share with us today?
What, for Google's May update?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean that
user experience.
Yeah. So I mean that's kind of, I guess, what the web webinar was covering. So it was there's seven tests that you need to pass. So there was the original ones, and then there are probably the harder ones are the new signals. So those are the core web vitals. And I think my biggest tip really would be, apart from having a really fast web host, it would be to try and get on top of the scripts. So maybe start with the client-side scripts first. So run your website through a tool like Pingdom or GTmetrix, look at the file requests and pay attention to the JavaScript requests. See what's loading there, and are some of them unnecessary to load straight away? Could you defer them? That would be one tip. And then the other tip would be thinking about your server-side scripts. So, if you've been really thorough, what you could do is disable all your plugins, or one at a time, clear the cache, run it through the PageSpeed tool test to see if that's actually holding you back. Because sometimes you might just have one rogue plugin that's doing a lot of damage from PageSpeed. Now, I'm talking about WordPress, but it applies to other content management systems as well.
Okay, awesome. There's some other questions. Maybe I could answer these. Walter is now providing high frequency and standard options. I've heard the high frequency one is significantly better. Has anyone tested? Aldis Zaltzmanis has tested this. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Sorry if I didn't. It is better. I wouldn't say significantly. It is definitely more model structure and better, and it is better choice. If you're starting the new server, it is better choice to choose Walter high frequency, of course. Then Vivek, hello, there are many WooCommerce websites which are relatively slow because of loads of plugins. How Google new Google updates will do their rankings as Joe explained today. So it will rank by those 7 metrics explained. So you would need to have a better server, faster server to optimize website better, to make it more modern, let's say, to comply with all Google rules that we will have. And Marin has another question. I will reply directly to you and to everyone on this link for this webinar when it goes live, because I'm not quite sure, and I apologize because I don't have that information. Because the question was, does the user can use the coupon we provided, or it's only for the first time for free trials? And I will definitely let you know about this information. Okay, Joe, is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
No, I think it's been really good. So I've really enjoyed it. But, I genuinely have been impressed with Cloudways. They were actually my shortlist when I went to Kinsta. And if I'm being honest, the reason I didn't go with Cloudways is I had read that Kinsta's support was better, and I wanted to have some good support. But to be honest, I've been here 2 weeks, and the support has been great. It's been as good, if not better, than Kinsta. So, I'd really give it the thumbs up on the support.
Nice to hear that. Nice to hear that you were the great guest and great host, because you were speaking the most of this webinar. So I was just here to host you in front of Cloudways, but you were a host for our visitors. We had a really nice number of attendees here today. I hope everyone enjoyed. Joe enjoyed it, definitely. I enjoyed it. So see you soon. We will announce the next webinar with also some interesting guests. And we'll see. Maybe we'll invite Joe again sometimes in the near future, because we had a really nice webinar today with Joe. Have a great day, everyone.
That'd be great.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye now. Thank you.